Welcome to Whispers from Hell, where untold horrors and chilling mysteries await your discovery. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, so you won't miss a single whisper from the darkness. Are you ready? Because once you step in, there's no turning back. Abruptly, he felt its hot breath before he could do or see anything he was. Picked up and tossed a few yards into the air, whoever or whatever that was had. Massive strength and knew his name, and that made him question himself obviously. It was too much for him to handle. Father felt defeated. He knew of his impending doom. Whatever it was, it couldn't be human. Barely conscious, his terror intensified when he heard a horrific high-pitched howl. My father was beyond terrified and admitted to almost wetting himself. If you help me through this, sigh. Promise he stopped drinking. He prayed in an attempt to bargain with God, but he was barely conscious at this point. His vision went dark and he collapsed. Waking up, he found himself in a canyon. He was relieved to know he was still alive, but he slowly realized it had not been a dream. He saw his flesh was exposed to the cold wind, and the intensity of the pain throughout his body was excruciating. It was almost dawn, but it was winter, and snowflakes were starting to fall. Moments passed when he started hearing noises nearby. He began to panic. The injured man stumbled to his feet, gathering his bearings, and without looking back, climbed out of the canyon. Once again, he started making his way home as fast as he could. He knew, instantly recognizing this feeling, that he had been followed, not just being followed, but being tracked at a great speed. Father was able to feel and hear the creature's noisy breath only inches behind him. He was petrified, but kept moving even if he wanted to run. He was too wounded. He almost fainted when he would to that, and he kept good to his word. He quit the liquid courage for good. After that this happened when I was 10, there were 5 or 6 of us spending the night at my friend Charlie's house. Her parents owned a ranch in the hill country region of Texas, and their home was built on top of a hill. Other than the dirt driveway up to their house, the hill was wildland covered in cedar trees. It was a clear, slightly chilly night in October or November. It's been a few years since I was 10, so bear with me. But after the sun went down, the moon was out, so we stayed out playing hide and seek using the driveway as a base. The ranch was far enough out the way and well fenced, so her parents didn't have a problem with it anyway. During one round of hide and seek, me and my friend Gina were the last 2 hidden. We were so good at avoiding being found that the seeker found everyone else, or so we thought, and elicited their help to find us. We had made it back down the road when 3 of us girls unknowingly cut us off, and we ducked down behind a large ridge of dirt and remained concealed. Gina chucked a rock across the road behind them to divert their attention. We were waiting for them to get far enough off the road to make a dramatic rush for the safety of base when I heard what sounded like a rock getting dislodged and sliding down the hill behind us. Like I thought Gina might have done it, so I didn't say anything, but she kind of looked at me and asked if I was okay. I was about to reply when we heard what sounded like one of my friends, Charlie, the one whose house we were staying at, calling from way down the hill behind us, "Help me." We bolted straight up and yelled for the others. They came running to the road, and we told them what we heard. No one had seen Charlie since we had started that round of hide and seek. We took them to the spot where we then hid from them and called out Charlie's name. For a moment all was quiet, then faintly even further down the hill we heard her say, "Help, I'm stuck." We panicked and ran up the driveway as fast as we could to get Charlie's parents when we burst through the kitchen door ready to yell for her. Mom and Dad Charlie was sitting at the bar eating a popsicle. I wondered how long it was going to take for you to find me, she gloated. We all flipped out in the way that only 10-year-old girls can. Her parents heard us freaking out and decided to come down and see what was going on. We told them what happened, and her dad grabbed his shotgun and got in the truck, and he went to drive around the ranch, making sure there wasn't anyone on the property who wasn't supposed to be there. But he didn't find anything. I've always wondered what we heard that night. We didn't talk about it much, but I know it remained in all our minds every time we stayed over there past sundown. Does anyone know what it may have been, especially since other people seem to have heard little girls' voices? Outdoors explanations. Welcome. When I was a preteen, I went on a bit of a solo hike up the tallest mountain around. This was Central Texas, though, so you can substitute tall hill for mountain to be more accurate. Anyway, I walked and cut through pastures and climbed fences until I climbed out to the top. It was the first time I had done it solo, and it was a lot of zigzag in my route. I sat there enjoying the view for a bit before deciding to come down. Unfortunately, I got turned around and basically came down the wrong side when I figured out where I was probably 3 or 5 miles from my house if I went straight through the woods, and probably 7 by road. It was starting to get dark, so I began walking down this dirt road. It was a long way, but I was not too worried, as I knew where I was and all it would take me now was time and effort. I could do that. As I walked, I passed by a cemetery. It was getting quite dark by this point, and I was startled by a truck coming up behind me. It had 2 guys in the truck who just looked like regular country boys, nothing sinister or special. They pulled up beside me and rolled down their window. Hey, little girlie, your right need a right. I measured all this in my mind real quick and decided I would rather stick with what I knew than get into a truck with strangers, even well-meaning ones. I shook my head at them and kept on walking, approaching a corner of the cemetery and a curve in the road. The truck stayed there, shining its lights on me as I trudged to the corner. The corner was pretty open, with a small scattering of trees clustered, but with no real cover or concealment. If I did decide I needed to run or hide on top of that, the cemetery had a high chain link fence that I doubted my ability to clamber over easily could muster. I started around the corner, and as I did, I heard the truck get back into gear and start coming towards me again. Suddenly fear took over, and I bolted to the side of the road as soon as I saw the headlights were coming on me, intending to get behind the trees and let them pass. Instead, I tripped and fell flat into a long rut in the ditch. I immediately stayed still and heard the truck arrive parallel to me on the road and stop again. A spotlight clicked on, and immediately among the trees in the ditch, the arc was deep enough and the grass was high enough that I was perfectly hidden from their view. I watched the spotlight slowly pan up across the cemetery, and then I heard one of them say, "Screw this," and with a spray of dirt, they disappeared into the dirt. I climbed out and hiked the rest of the way home, no problem, and somewhere too. Someone I am a ghost. Story. I recently went on a hike with my friend and his mini schneer at our local state park. We had gone on the trail several times before. It's very popular with hikers and families. It was late evening and getting dark, so we picked up the pace once it was dark enough to not be able to see where we were stepping. I turned on a little flashlight that my mom had given me just that day. She said that she was worried about me walking to my car after my late night classes and told me to shine it in someone's face if there was anyone creepy, which I thought was silly. Bringing this flashlight was a total fluke, but I was happy to have it for the increasingly dark hike. We were about a 10-minute walk away from the edge of the forest where we parked when we encountered a lone male walking in the same direction as us, about 100 yards ahead. He was a Caucasian in his mid-50s, wearing non-hiking clothes. He was walking slowly, which was odd because it was very dark and most hikers on the trail were long gone, and if not, they would be hurrying out of the woods. The man did not have a flashlight. In the very dark forest, my finger slipped from the flashlight and it turned off for a few seconds. I turned it back on and the man had stopped walking and was standing in the path ahead of us. He quickly moved to this side as soon as I turned the light back on and said something into his cell phone while we continued forward towards him. As we walked by the man standing on the side of the path, our normally friendly dog barked and growled at the man. The only words we heard the man say were, "Ah," she single quotes S.A, an ankle biter. He was suddenly not talking on his phone. I shined the flashlight in his direction while we walked by to know where he was located in these extremely dark woods. I had a really weird feeling about him and started jogging away with my friend. We ended up in a full run out the woods. As we were getting back to the car, we saw the man exit the woods maybe a minute after us and walk quickly towards us. As we got in our car, he had to have been running because we ran the whole way out the woods and were in our mid-20s. This guy was significantly older, so it would have required effort to run that far and fast for him. When we got to the car with the man still quickly approaching, I told my friend to floor it, and we got the hell out of there. When my father was in his 20s, he liked to frequent a remote hiking trail that was about a 30-minute drive from his house. This trail was situated on the outskirts of his town and was a popular beauty spot. Although it was a huge tourist attraction at the weekend, it could be extremely quiet during the week. Now, this was in the 1960s when stranger danger wasn't prevalent, and he never considered the dangers of being alone in such a remote place. However, this was all about to change in September of 1968 when he took his last ever solo trip to the trail. He had been frequenting it for about 3 months at this point with little to no incidents. He had done the same routine, where he would park up at 5:30 and continue east to take the larger part of the trail, which then looped around and brought him back to the car park at 7:30. This was the summer and evenings were relatively light until about 8 o'clock p.m. My father was particularly strict with his timekeeping because there was little light on the trails, plus the change in temperature hugely decreased at dusk. He was always afraid he would lose his footing or be unable to find his way back to the car, so he always ensured he came back before dark. This particular evening he had arrived later at around 6 o'clock p.m. and was surprised to see a tired-looking camper van already in the parking lot. Normally, you get a couple of cars that he'd become familiar with, but he had never seen this vehicle before, and something about it just gave him the jitters, but he initially put it down as just never seeing it before. He ignored any red flags that popped up, but decided to take a quicker route to ensure he would be back before dark. He consequently decided to take the trail north, which would save him about 30 minutes. Halfway into his hike, he starts to get the sensation he's being followed. He turns back and expects to see another hiker, but the footpath behind him is empty. He looks around to see if there are any animals or a ranger in view, but he can't see anything, putting it down to paranoia after seeing the van. He continues, but tries to tune into his environment as best he can, listening for any sound or movement deeper into the trail. He becomes more and more uncomfortable and realizes that he is totally alone. He hasn't seen another hiker, and the feeling of being watched hasn't left him. He knows he has another 30 minutes of walking, so turning back wouldn't make any sense. He continues, but quickens his pace and tries to rationalize why he's feeling like this. But it's no good, as he still feels like a deer in headlights. As he approaches a bend in the trail, he immediately gets into the fight or flight feeling when he senses he's in immediate danger. He half expects to see someone as he turns the bend, but no one's there, still absolutely terrified. He decided he needs to hide from whatever or whoever might be out there. So he hides behind some bushes and tries to remain as quiet as possible. A few minutes go by and nothing, not a sound, and he starts to convince himself that it is probably safe to continue. He is about to come out of his hiding spot when he can hear shuffling sounds. It's very light, but coming from the direction he came from. He's hoping that it turns out to be a deer or another forest creature, so that he can laugh about it, and that he's been afraid of nothing. But he sees the outline of a person. He can only partially see them due to his obstructed view, but senses this is a man with a very broad frame. He's walking slowly and carefully past the bushes as if he doesn't want to be seen. My father then comes to the realization that it is probably who had been following him. OT set off his warning messages to hide. He quickly ponders what he needs to do. He can't go back in the opposite direction, and it's a good hour of walking and nightfall that's approaching. He also doesn't want to continue the remainder of the trail because he may meet whoever was following him. He considers the possibility of hiding for a bit longer, but that would mean being stuck on the trail in the pitch darkness. Then he realizes where he is. He is about a 10-minute run up to the main road that is situated behind the wooded area where he resides. All he has to do is get to the road, and it's probably another 10 minutes to his car, but it's 10 minutes of being in the open. He may just get away with it, so he waits until he suspects the man is out of view and makes a run for it. 2 minutes into his running, he starts to hear the branches snapping to his right. It's the man from before. He's now pursuing him through the trees. My father manages to outrun the man and makes it safely onto the road, and pauses for a second to catch his breath, and then jogs back to the car park, too afraid to look back. On safe arrival to the car, he notices the camper van is still there, but the other cars have since left, leaving him alone. He quickly gets to his car and drives out as fast as he can. As he's pulling out of the road, he looks towards where he had just come from, and the man is just standing in the road. He's staring wide-eyed at my father, with no expression, no movement, just stood there, staring. My father drives in the opposite direction and can see the man just stood in the road, still watching his car. As he pours out of view, my father still has no idea if the man actually meant any harm, but it took him a good long time to return to the trails. He would always take a friend and preferred to go it busy at times. He did report the incident of the park ranges, but nothing ever really came from it. I have recently ventured up the trails just with friends to confirm that it's not somewhere you would want to be. Alone, I live near the Canadian border in central Washington state. More bears than people in my little valley. One afternoon, I was walking up the hill near my house and saw, after passing a large tree about 20 feet away, a very large cougar. My estimate for size probably very accurate. Our weight 175 to 190 lb. Length from nose to tip of tail close to 9 feet. Thick bulky male muscles on the back of his neck like a large pit bull or breeding. Me not a scar on him that I could see. No chunks of his ears from previous fights. Missing hair. Long perfect. You could see the muscles rippling through the hair that were 1 to 1 and 1/2 to 2, and he was coming down the hill and had just stepped from behind a tree of his own. We both frozen our tracks. He was staring at me like I had never been stared at in my life. Intense X-ray vision, never blinking kind of stare, and knocked the wind out of me. We stood there frozen, staring at each other intently for what seemed like 15 to 20 minutes. Neither of us moved. He was slightly higher on the hill looking down at me, maybe 1 or 2 feet taller than I was. He seemed to like that neither of us moved. I had a 9mm pistol in my shoulder holster, but I didn't pull it out. I could have very quickly, but probably not quick enough considering they can jump really far. It was a very intense sharpening of the senses and perception, probably the effect of adrenaline. It was like time stood still, and I could count every hair on his face. After 15 minutes or so, to my great relief, he slowly blinked once, still staring. However, the spell had been broken. He took a deep breath and slowly and smoothly turned uphill and walked away at a pretty good clip, never looking back. It's been 3 years now, and I have was a very intense sharpening of the senses and perception, probably the effect of adrenaline. It was like time stood still, and I could count every hair on his face. After 15 minutes or so, to my great relief, he slowly blinked once, still staring. However, the spell had been broken. He took a deep breath and slowly and smoothly turned uphill and walked away at a pretty good clip, never looking back. It's been 3 years now, and I have. Well, but whatever you think and whatever you've heard, the male cougars in the wilderness of the apex predators in the northern woods. I've seen a whole lot of cougars in zoos. Nothing in a zoo can even come close to this guy. He was the most perfect and terrifying specimen I've ever seen. Supremely confident and dangerous. I was with my older brother, spotting deer a couple of miles from our house. My brother had just started driving a few weeks ago, so we decided to take up my mom's car for a spin. We were on a very narrow and windy dirt road with no street lights at all. We didn't see any deer, so we were about to leave the area. I heard some twigs or something snapping in the brush, and it sounded no more than a few yards away. Me and my brother both shined our spotlights towards the sound, hoping we would see a deer or turkey, but we saw something that will probably never leave our minds until the day we die. There were over a dozen people standing right in front of us looking at us. We were so scared, we just zoomed out of there. We didn't really tell anyone because we were pretty much on private property, but it was terrifying just the way all those people were in the woods, standing in the dark with blank faces. It was really creepy. We never went anywhere near that road again. I was hiking deep in a valley on the island of Hawaii. I hit the trail that morning and had gone non-stop for about 7 to 8 hours. Stopping only for minor breaks to check my trusty compass. Yes, I still use a compass for hiking drinking water or to pick up any trash I find, as my mama taught me to do so when I was a kid. I'm rounding the clearing of one of the larger and lesser-known waterfalls when I hear a shrill mixture of laughter and trashy rap music coming from a cheap speaker. A group of 5 young adults had taken up residence around the falls and were having a little swear, which is completely fine, except as I get closer I realize that their camping site is littered with disposable red drinking cups and beer bottles. I pop open the bag I used to haul all the trash I've been finding, and sure enough, most of it is red plastic cups and beer bottles. The same brand they have. I'm 31 and have no problem with youngsters being youngsters, but I can't stand it when people litter back home, especially in the beautiful forest. They hadn't seen me yet, and I didn't want to startle them, so I announced my presence by stepping as loudly as I could. The group eventually turns to silently acknowledge me, and one of them turns down the speaker. I politely introduce myself and make sure they understand I'm not any type of government employee or anything, just a friendly local who loves his home. I showed them my collection of debris that seemed to match theirs and asked if they knew where it came from. This is where it got dicey. 2 of the 3 guys then got pretty agitated and asked me, and what I can only assume was an attempt to impress their female companions, yet real close to me, and turned the testosterone on blast. Yes, sir. What you going to do about it? And all of that. Now, like I said, I'm 31 and really have no desire to needlessly scrap with the idiots in the woods over some garbage. That being said, I completely remember the years of my life where that would have been my one and only reaction to the situation. I remain calm and civil and try my best to sequester the coming violence by offering to take the rest of the trash they have, just so they wouldn't worry about hauling it back down to the start of the trail. All I asked in return was that they tried to leave the place just as clean, if not cleaner than they found it. This argument goes on for 5 to 6 minutes when one of the girls suddenly shrieks and points towards the trees behind me, claiming she just saw someone running in the distance. I've been told that I can be a pretty intimidating guy when I want to be, but I don't know if it was the liquid courage in their cups or opportunity they saw as I turned to check behind me, and one of the alpha males decides to throw his now empty cup to the back of my head. This causes me to drop my compass and knuckle up for a beating. I take a slow breath and slowly turn back to face him, but not before an audible crack punctures the air, and this guy is on his knees and clasping the back of his head, some blood pooling between his fingers. His friends are panicked and looking at the top of the waterfall, where I just barely make out the shadow of a figure against the sunlight before it ducks back beyond a cliff. I'm at a loss for words when I noticed what actually struck the kid's head. It skidded to a stop by my feet. It was a narrow piece of lava rock that was shaped for use in native Hawaiian whirling, or ma. I decided to capitalize on the apparent fear in the group's panicked youth faces and cordially announce, maybe it's time for you guys to move on. The group scuttered around, hastily picking up their gear and being sure to grab whatever trash they had. Without further prompting, the group hops back on the trail, just as the distant clamor of branches snapping can be heard from deeper within the valley, which sends them rocketing back through the trees. This logically should have terrified me as well, but something in my gut told me I'll be fine as long as I'm doing the right thing, I decided to err on the side of caution and follow the group down the trail, but at my own pace, all the while cringing under the feeling that I was being watched the entire time. I heard the occasional twig snap near my peripherals, but refused to take my eyes off the way back. I eventually just get back to my truck just before dusk when I stopped to realize I left my damn compass on the ground at the falls as my back's facing the entrance of the trail, and I'm pee down my cargo pockets in hopes that I was wrong. My compass hits the ground between my legs from behind me and rolls a foot or two down the truck before stopping. I damn near crapped myself, snatched the compass up and yelled back, "Thank you, sorry," hop in my truck and piece the hell out of there. Who or whatever it was that followed me to the end of the trail definitely felt it was time for me to move on as well. A few years back, when I was around the age of 14 and my brother 9, my dad, my little brother, and I went out deer hunting in the afternoon right before sundown. While we were walking through the woods, before we even got started, my little brother tugged on my arm and asked me if I saw that. I said it was probably his imagination, and he let go of my arm. A few minutes later, I couldn't hear him walking behind us anymore and turned around to find he had gone. I quickly told my dad, and we looked for him for at least half an hour. When he walked over out of nowhere towards the both of us, he was covered in mud, like he'd fallen somewhere. I worriedly asked him where he'd gone, and he just stared at me, telling me he couldn't remember and thought that he had never left. He acted normally afterwards, just as though nothing had happened. I don't know if it's scary to anyone else, but it shook the entire family, including myself, for quite a bit. I've had some crazy animal encounters with bears and lions. Here's a good cat story. There is a recreational area just outside of Laramie, Wyoming, called Vadu, which is a beautiful forested area with large rocky outcrops, well known to climbers. It's one of the few places in the country where local climbers regularly bring shotguns to the CAG. In 2016, at a particularly rocky outcropping known as Reynolds Hill, which is a bit deeper into the Woo and a longer hick from the nearest forested road, my then girlfriend and I spent the day climbing and finishing our last route as the sun set. As we gathered our things and hit the trail in the dark, I whistled for my dog, but couldn't find him. I flashed my headlamp into the trees and saw a pair of eyes reflecting back at me about 10 meters away in the trees. At first, I thought it was my dog, until I realized those eyes are way too far apart to be my 60 lb dog, and the eyes were much too far above the ground. The distance between them implied a head that was massive. Just then, my dog comes out from the same trees and joins us. Oblivious to the fact he was being stalked, I flipped my headlamp on to keep light shining on the cat, as cats tend to pounce when you have your back turned to them for over a mile. This thing stalked us, never getting closer than 10 meters, but it was big enough to be a damn scary high. Count 4 years later, in September 2020, my new girlfriend and I, with our 2 dogs, are climbing vow. We meet and befriend AAL couple who have been camped out. They're climbing for a few months. I told them the story of being stalked, coming out of Reynolds Hill, and a couple of days later, all 4 of us find ourselves camping and climbing Reynolds Hill after a late session, finishing up that same route from 4 years ago. We begin hiking out in the dark. It's such a déjà vu feeling that as we come down the Rocks onto the trail, I stopped to retell the story, explaining to them, "Hey guys, this is the exact spot where I fell flash my light into the trees and saw the eyes literally as I'm recreating the story. I happened to flash my light and catch a pair of eyes reflecting back at us about 15 meters out and up high on a cliff brad. They think I'm messing with them until the cat comes down and gets within 10 meters of us. We proceed to hike out in the dark, and the cat stalks us the entire way out. Near the trailhead, the trail winds through an aspen grove, and just before we entered it, the cat comes within 5 meters. The previous cat was much bigger, but this cat got way too close the other guy. And I were hiking backwards, eyes and lights on the cat, knife in hand, while our girlfriends were huddled close by. Hiking forwards, it was sketchy crazy how the exact same plot unfolded at the same hill after the same route. I'd like to imagine it was the original cat's offspring. A couple of days later, my girlfriend actually saw a lion about 30 meters away down the small valley in a for-spread chasing. Pray no one else saw nor heard it. I tend to ask all the climbers I interact with out there if they've seen any cats. Most of them haven't, but if you're keeping a watchful eye, you'll see them out there. For sure the locals know that, and they carry shotguns. This happened last year. I'm a guy in my early 20s, and there's a park close to the place I live. You follow this road that goes down to the small river. The road begins in a fairly populated area, and as you go down the river, maybe 200 meters, you get to the park. Near the small river, the park doesn't have any lights, and even though it's surrounded by many residential buildings, it's still isolated with the trees all around like a smaller forest. There's a specific area that I go to when I chill out for a bit. It's at the end of a park, and there's a stone I like to sit on too. Get to this area, you have to walk across an open grassy field, and I come here when I want to chill out by myself, have peace of mind and escape from the everyday madness that life can sometimes be. It was around 10 p.m., and I grabbed my bike and start riding towards that place. It takes no more than 3 to 5 minutes to get there on a bike, even though it's night and the park is pitch black. I still wanted to go and smoke a cigarette or two near the river in the beautiful nature, so I get there, park my bike next to it, and light up a sick pill out my phone and watch something on YouTube while enjoying the calmness around me of the sound of flowing water. I spent half hour looking at my phone when I caught a glimpse of something in the dark. I'm getting chills as I remember this. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. It was pitch black after all, and after a few seconds, I realized something is actually definitely there 10 to 15 meters away from me. I got up to get a better look and noticed that the dark silhouette is slowly approaching as if to not make a sound, and then it suddenly dropped to the ground. As I saw the movement on the ground, I thought it must be an animal, a raccoon perhaps. Why the hell would a person slowly move towards me and then drop to the ground? When I noticed it right, I turned on the lights on my bicycle and pointed it towards the dark figure. It was not an animal, it was a Middle Eastern man ducking down and staring at me. Now, keep in mind, I'm at the dead end of a park and no roads lead to here, so you have to get through an open field to arrive. The light of my phone was definitely visible to him. Hi, I say. As soon as the light revealed him, I did this kind of automatically. I guess I was looking for a reaction. I did that just to bust him trying to sneak up on me. Turn it off. He says, why turn it off? I'm Just going to leave, I say, as I'm getting on my bike, still carefully watching for his movement. As I'm driving away, I'm still looking at him closely. He got up and made a few steps towards the place I was sitting at, then ducked down again. I got far enough away to feel safe, and instantly wondered what would have happened if I'd have kept my eyes on the phone for another minute. Guess I won't be chilling at that place anymore, but at least not at night. What were his intentions? He definitely was trying to stay quiet in the dark. This is a good reminder that sickos do exist. Be careful out in the woods. Everyone, I have an experience to share with you that happened to me and a group of my very close friends. But before I get into it, I'm going to give you a little bit of context. My name is Tom. I weigh about 160 liters and stand at 5'1". I'm 25 and love the outdoors so much that I actually started a club in high school called the Outdoor Grizzlies. It was a very small group of us who had set up different hiking trips to go on. We had hiked all the way to the beautiful Sleeping Giant State Park trails of Connecticut, all the way to the Julia Pfeiffer Burns State Park in California, which has a fantastic 80 feet waterfall with a lavish scenery. In this group of my fellow friends are my best friend from middle school, Jake, my good friend I met in freshman year of high school, Jennifer, and Jake's girlfriend since high school, Christine. The four of us were inseparable, and we went on all of our hiking trips together in high school. We held fundraisers, and the school saw how much we loved nature and that we could make a career out of it, so they gladly allow us to take a step further. We were all in shape for the most part, which is why we love doing what we did. Not only did it free our minds and give us clarity, but it took away some of the anxiety that you often experience as a teenager, as well as depression. Anyway, we at least didn't have to go through it. Very much as I said, the hiking really helped deal with it. Even our teachers at some point went with us and said that it really helped manage their stress and anxiety too. But after graduating from high school, things sort of died down at the club. We all kept in touch and stuff, as most people in high school do. But life happens. The only one I really spoke to was Jake. He and Christine were still together, but I barely spoke about hiking because it just wasn't in our blood anymore. Jennifer did her own thing and was seeing a college Joe called Robert, and with the exception of Jake, we all drifted for a few years. One evening in May, I decided it would be nice to throw a bonfire, just a few close friends. Christine didn't really want to hang around people she didn't know, and she had the bright idea to invite Jennifer. Through the power of social media, it turns out Jennifer was actually very happy and willing to come. She spoke about how life got in the way of her and Robert, and how they broke up. The bonfire would be just what she needed so that we could all catch up and talk about life, and it would be like old times. She said her number was still the same and said to call her to confirm. It was easier than I thought. Suddenly I was filled with happiness and excitement. It was going to be just like old times. When the bonfire happened, it went off without a hitch. We had a fantastic time. It was around 1:30 a.m. and everyone else had gone. The ones who were left were myself, Jake, Jennifer, and Christine. The cool spring breeze embraced my neck, and the fire kissed my nose, leaving me with goosebumps. Jake had mentioned how peaceful and nostalgic this was as he downed the tail end of his beer. The energy in the group was so nice. And Jennifer mentioned how I once slipped on a wet rock trying to run away from an unusual bug, which we all nicknamed the bug incident. We all laughed, and Jake said that if only we could relive those days. Christine looked over at Jennifer and said maybe we can't go back but can relive them. Then a sudden idea crossed everyone's mind. See, we'd always spoken about going somewhere exotic and having a huge hike there. That was our dream years ago, but then the spark of genius filled us all and we formed a plan to go to Hawaii. Jake's and fortunate for us was a flight attendant, and I had a rainy day with a generous amount of money, and Jennifer saved money for a trip that she was going to take on her own, and Christine had a decent-sized YouTube following from her makeup channel, and she was sure whatever else she needed, she would crowdfund. After 3 weeks, we pulled our finances, and we were able to afford the trip. We were going to stay around the Honolulu area because there was a very well-known hiking place with a beautiful waterfall. We arrived to our destination and decided to be tourists for the first 3 days, leaving the last 3 to hike the area and the 7th day to get ready to leave. We, however, wanted to take it a step further and wanted to camp out there too. We had done it many times. We were well versed in camping, so we felt like we could take this on no problem. We made our way deeper and deeper into the forest. We saw people along the way, tourists. We spoke to a few friendly locals, and then we began to notice how much more isolated it became. Christine had said that we seemed far away and didn't have any signal on our phones. She bought a compass and a map, so she said we should just find a place around the area that we were in, and we all agreed. We found a beautiful place, almost as if like it were waiting for us. It was on a cliffside looking over almost the entire island. It was at this point we realized just how far we'd hiked, and it was relatively safe. It was a fence made of bamboo, so you couldn't really fall unless you purposefully threw yourself over the fence. But even then, there was a big enough rock protruding out so that you wouldn't fall. It was the most magnificent view had ever